Take one more step, and I'll arrest you for trespassing. The warning cut through the construction site like a blade. Drills stopped. Hammers fell silent. Even the crane above the unfinished headquarters seemed frozen against the pale morning sky. Adrian Walker stood just beyond the temporary steel gate, one hand holding a rolled set of architectural plans, the other resting calmly beside his dark wool coat. Dust clung to his polished shoes. Behind him, sunlight flashed across the glass towers of downtown Ashford. In front of him rose the most ambitious public building the city had commissioned in 30 years. A new police headquarters. His police headquarters. But Officer Ryan Cole did not know that. Ryan stepped closer, his white hand tightening around Adrian's access badge as if it were evidence from a crime scene. He was broad-shouldered, clean-shaven, and carried his uniform with the confidence of a man who believed the badge did more than identify him. He believed it made him right. "I already showed you my authorization," Adrian said. His voice was steady. Almost too steady. Ryan glanced at the badge, then back at Adrian's face. His eyes moved slowly over the tailored coat, the leather document case, the silver watch, and finally the plans beneath Adrian's arm. Then he smiled. Not warmly. "You expect me to believe you're in charge here?" Several workers turned away. Others pretended to check their equipment. They had seen Adrian arrive many times during the past year, but Ryan had been temporarily assigned to site security only 3 days earlier. He knew the uniforms. He knew the contractors. He did not know Adrian. And sometimes prejudice grows most confidently in the space where knowledge should have been. "I didn't say I was in charge," Adrian replied. "I said I need to inspect the east atrium before the concrete pour begins." Ryan gave a short laugh. "The engineers are already inside." "I'm aware. And you're not one of them." Adrian looked past him toward the rising structure. Morning light spilled through the unfinished windows, illuminating columns, cables, and bare concrete. At the center of the main entrance, a massive steel eagle had been mounted above the future lobby. Adrian had drawn that eagle himself. Not as a symbol of domination. As a reminder that authority should always be watched from above. His gaze shifted lower. Something was wrong. A red support marker near the eastern beam had been moved nearly 18 inches from its approved position. Adrian's expression changed, not with fear, but with focus. "Stop the pour," he said. Ryan's smile disappeared. "What?" "The support alignment is wrong. Shut down the east section immediately." Now the workers were listening. A foreman near the scaffolding lowered his radio. 2 concrete operators exchanged uneasy glances. Ryan looked around and saw attention moving away from him, toward the black man he had already decided did not belong. His jaw tightened. "You don't give orders here." "I'm not trying to challenge you, officer. I'm trying to prevent a structural failure." Ryan stepped forward until only inches separated them. "Men like you always have an explanation." The word settled over the site. Heavy. Ugly. Unmistakable. Adrian inhaled slowly. He had spent 3 years designing this building, 3 years meeting with city officials, studying security systems, calculating evacuation routes, and imagining a headquarters that might represent trust instead of fear. Now he stood outside its gates, being judged by a man who had never looked beyond his skin. Ryan tore the access badge from its plastic clip. "You're done here." Then he dropped it into the mud. Adrian looked down at the badge, then at the misplaced support beam behind Ryan. When he raised his eyes again, there was no anger in them. Only certainty. "You should call your supervisor," Adrian said quietly. Ryan reached for his handcuffs. "No," he replied. "You should call a lawyer." The click of the handcuffs was louder than the machinery. Ryan seized Adrian's wrist and pulled it behind his back, forcing the rolled plans from his hand. They struck the ground and opened across the mud, revealing the blue lines of the building rising behind them. No one moved. The foreman stared at the drawings. He recognized the signature in the lower corner. Adrian Walker, lead architect. His mouth opened, but Ryan spoke first. Interfere with me, and you'll be removed too. The threat worked. The foreman lowered his eyes. Adrian felt the cold metal tighten around his wrists, but his attention remained fixed on the eastern support. A concrete truck had begun reversing toward the pouring station. Its warning alarm repeated through the silence. Beep. 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 Each sound carried the weight of a countdown. Officer Cole, Adrian said, you still have time to stop this. Ryan shoved him toward the security vehicle. You're worried about the wrong structure. A few workers exchanged nervous looks. They had watched Adrian walk the site before. They had seen supervisors gather around him, listening while he pointed toward walls that existed only on paper. But fear had a way of turning witnesses into statues. Imagine standing there, knowing a disaster could be prevented, while the man holding you refused to believe you belonged. Adrian did not struggle. He had learned long ago that anger was often used as evidence against men who looked like him. A raised voice became aggression. A sudden movement became a threat. Even dignity could be described as defiance when the wrong person controlled the report. So he remained calm. Ryan mistook that calm for surrender. Who sent you? He demanded. The mayor's office. Ryan laughed. Of course it did. He bent down, lifted one of the plans, and glanced at the complex structural markings as though they were meaningless decoration. Then he tore the page down the middle. A gasp moved through the workers. Adrian's expression finally hardened. That was the approved reinforcement plan. Then somebody can print another one. No, Adrian said quietly. That copy contains the correction the contractor never received. The concrete truck stopped beside the eastern platform. Workers reached for the pouring hoses. Above them, the misplaced beam gave a low metallic groan. This time, everyone heard it. The foreman looked up sharply. Ryan did too. For one brief second, uncertainty crossed his face. Then a convoy of black city vehicles entered the site, their tires cutting through the dust. The lead car stopped beside the gate, and Mayor Rebecca Hayes stepped out before her security detail could open the door. Her eyes moved from the torn plans to Adrian's handcuffs. Then she looked at Ryan. Officer, she said, her voice dangerously calm, why have you arrested the man who designed this building? The site seemed to hold its breath. Ryan's hand remained wrapped around Adrian's arm, but the confidence had drained from his face. He looked at Mayor Rebecca Hayes, then at the muddy badge beneath his boot, as if the ground might offer him another version of what had just happened. Madam Mayor, he began, this man entered a restricted area and refused to cooperate. Rebecca did not answer immediately. She walked past him. Her heels pressed into the dirt as she approached the torn blueprints. She knelt, lifted both halves, and carefully aligned them in her hands. Adrian's name was still visible beneath the mud. Lead architect. Rebecca raised her eyes. This man did not enter a restricted area, she said. He was summoned here by my office. Whispers moved through the workers. Ryan loosened his grip. I wasn't informed. You were shown his credentials. They could have been fake. Rebecca's expression hardened. Did you verify them? Ryan said nothing. That silence answered for him. Adrian turned toward the eastern platform. The metallic groan came again, deeper this time. Dust fell from a temporary joint above the workers preparing the concrete hose. Clear that section, Adrian said. Rebecca followed his gaze. What's wrong? The reinforcement marker was shifted. If they pour now, the load will settle against an unsupported connection. The foreman stepped forward, pale beneath his helmet. He warned us 10 minutes ago. Rebecca spun toward the platform. Shut it down. Radios erupted. Workers dropped the hoses and rushed away as the concrete pump groaned to a stop. A supervisor climbed the scaffolding, checked the alignment, and froze. He's right, the man shouted. The anchor plate is off. A wave of alarm passed through the site. Ryan looked at Adrian differently now, not with respect, but with the fear of a man realizing his arrogance had nearly become evidence. Rebecca faced him. Again. You detained the architect responsible for this building, destroyed an approved safety document, and ignored a structural warning. I was protecting the site. No, Adrian said quietly. You were protecting an assumption. The word struck harder than anger could have. Rebecca stepped closer to Ryan. Remove the cuffs. His fingers trembled as he reached for the key. For the first time that morning, the badge on his chest did not look powerful. It looked heavy. When the cuffs opened, Adrian rubbed his wrists but did not look away from the damaged plans. 3 years of work lay torn between the mayor's hands. Rebecca's voice dropped. Officer Cole, surrender your weapon and identification to my security chief. Ryan stared at her. Am I being suspended? Rebecca looked toward the cameras mounted above the gate. No, she said. You are being investigated. Ryan's badge landed in the security chief's palm with a dull metallic sound. For years, it had opened doors, ended arguments, and turned his suspicions into commands. Now it rested there like an object stripped of meaning. The workers watched in silence. Some looked relieved. Others looked ashamed. The foreman, Thomas Grant, stepped toward Adrian with the expression of a man carrying a confession. I should have spoken sooner, he said. Adrian studied him. You knew who I was. Thomas lowered his eyes. Yes. The answer hurt more than Ryan's handcuffs. Ryan had acted from prejudice. Thomas had witnessed it and chosen safety for himself. That was how abuse survived, not only through the people who committed it, but through everyone who decided silence was easier. Mayor Hayes turned toward the workers. Did anyone record what happened? At first, no one responded. Then a young electrician named Noah Bennett raised his phone. I did. Ryan's face tightened. Noah stepped forward slowly, holding the screen with both hands. The video showed everything, Ryan discarding Adrian's credentials, tearing the safety plan, ignoring the warning, and placing him in cuffs. But the clearest moment was the sentence that had silenced the site. Men like you always have an explanation. The mayor watched it once. She did. Not need to watch it again. Send that file to my office and internal affairs, she said. Ryan looked around desperately. That clip has no context. Adrian faced him. Red marks circled his wrists, but his voice remained calm. The context is that you saw my skin before you saw my credentials. Ryan opened his mouth, yet no defense came. Behind them, engineers gathered around the eastern beam. Measurements were checked. Photographs were taken. The misplaced anchor plate was worse than Adrian had feared. Had the concrete been poured, the entire atrium might eventually have carried stress through a weakened joint. Hundreds of officers, visitors, and employees would have walked beneath it. Rebecca looked at the damaged structure, then at Adrian. You saved this building before it was even finished. Adrian glanced at the torn plans in her hands. No, he replied. I tried to warn the people building it. His words left a deeper silence. Ryan had believed authority meant being obeyed. Adrian understood that real authority meant listening before someone was harmed. As investigators arrived, Ryan was escorted toward an unmarked vehicle. He passed the muddy access badge near the gate and paused. For the first time, he read the name. Adrian Walker. The man he had treated like an intruder had designed every hallway Ryan had expected to command. And now, before the headquarters had opened, its first lesson in justice had already begun. By noon, the construction site no longer sounded like a place preparing for celebration. The machinery had stopped. Yellow safety tape stretched across the eastern atrium, and engineers moved beneath the steel frame with measuring tools, cameras, and faces drained of confidence. Adrian stood beside a folding table reviewing the damaged reinforcement plan from memory. Every line mattered. Every number carried weight. Mayor Rebecca Hayes remained nearby, speaking quietly with the city attorney while internal affairs officers collected statements from the workers. No one laughed now. No one looked away. Thomas Grant approached again, holding Adrian's muddy access badge. "I cleaned it," he said. Adrian accepted it but did not clip it back. Onto his coat. Thomas swallowed. "I've worked on sites for 22 years. I know what happens when people challenge an officer. I have a family." "So does everyone who could have walked beneath that beam," Adrian replied. Thomas looked toward the unfinished atrium. The truth settled slowly across his face. Fear had protected him for 10 minutes. Adrian's warning might protect hundreds of people for decades. "I'm sorry," Thomas said. Adrian did not offer immediate forgiveness. Some apologies were sincere, but sincerity did not erase consequence. "Next time," he said, "speak before the handcuffs close." Across the site, Noah Bennett uploaded the recording to investigators. Other workers began stepping forward too. One remembered Ryan mocking a black delivery driver days earlier. Another described how he repeatedly searched minority contractors while waving white supervisors through the gate. The incident had not started that morning. That morning had only exposed it. Rebecca returned with the city attorney beside her. Internal Affairs found 3 prior complaints against Cole, she said. All dismissed for insufficient evidence. Adrian glanced toward the cameras above the gate. And now? Now there are witnesses, video, and a destroyed safety document. The wind lifted one torn corner of the blueprint. Rebecca placed her hand over it. "The headquarters opening will be delayed," she continued. "The council will demand answers." "It should," Adrian said. "But answers are not enough." Rebecca studied him. "What are you proposing?" Adrian looked at the building he had once imagined as a symbol of public trust. Its glass walls reflected the city, but reflection was not the same as honesty. "Every officer assigned here should complete bias intervention training before entering this building," he said. "Not a ceremony. Not a speech. Real accountability." Rebecca nodded slowly. "And the lobby?" Adrian looked toward the steel eagle above the entrance. "Change the dedication." "To what?" He picked up his badge, still stained at the edges with mud. "The Hall of Dignity." Rebecca's expression softened. Adrian stared at the unfinished headquarters. Ryan had tried to decide who belonged inside it. Now the man he had humiliated would decide what the building stood for. 3 days later, the city council chamber was filled beyond capacity. Reporters crowded the back wall. Officers stood beside community leaders. Construction workers sat beneath the bright ceiling lights, waiting to testify about what they had seen. At the center table sat Adrian Walker. The red marks around his wrists had faded, but the memory had not. Across the room, Ryan Cole entered without his uniform. No badge. No weapon. No authority stitched across his chest. He wore a gray suit that seemed too large for him, and for the first time, no one stepped aside when he passed. Mayor Rebecca Hayes called the hearing to order. The video began. On the large screen, Ryan's voice echoed through the chamber. "You don't give orders here." Then came the torn blueprint. The handcuffs. The sentence no one could misunderstand. "Men like you always have an explanation." Ryan lowered his eyes. When the video ended, silence filled the room. An internal affairs investigator approached the microphone and opened a thick folder. Officer Cole received 3 previous complaints involving racial profiling, she said. Each was dismissed after witnesses withdrew or supervisors described the incidents as misunderstandings. A photograph appeared on the screen. A black delivery driver forced to empty his truck. Another. A young contractor held against a fence while white workers entered without inspection. Then another. A retired teacher questioned for sitting inside her own car. Adrian watched the images pass. This was no longer only his story. Ryan had not created his prejudice at the construction gate. He had carried it there, protected by years of silence and reports written in language soft enough to hide hard truths. Ryan finally spoke. I followed my instincts. Adrian leaned toward the microphone. An instinct that always seems to fear the same skin is not protection. The chamber remained still. It is prejudice wearing the language of duty. Ryan looked up, anger flickering briefly across his face. You don't understand what officers face. Adrian's voice stayed calm. And you never try to understand what people face when the danger is the officer. The words moved through the chamber like a current. Thomas Grant testified next. His voice shook as he admitted he had recognized Adrian and remained silent. I was afraid of losing my job, he said. Adrian looked at him without cruelty. That fear is how injustice hires witnesses. By the end of the hearing, the council voted to recommend Ryan's termination and reopen every complaint connected to him. But Adrian did not smile. Accountability was not celebration. It was repair. As he left the chamber, Rebecca walked beside him. Do you think the headquarters can still represent trust? She asked. Adrian paused beneath the stone steps. Buildings cannot earn trust, he said. People do. Then he looked back at the chamber where one badge had finally stopped hiding a pattern. And today, he added, the city began reading the blueprint. 2 weeks later, Ryan Cole returned to the unfinished headquarters for the last time. He did not arrive in a patrol car. He came alone, carrying a cardboard box filled with the remains of a career he had once believed untouchable, framed commendations, photographs, training certificates, and the empty leather holder where his badge used to rest. The department had terminated him that morning. Every complaint connected to his name was being reopened, and the city attorney had begun contacting people whose voices had once been dismissed as unreliable. Ryan stopped near the entrance. Above him, workers were installing new steel letters across the unfinished lobby wall. The Hall of Dignity. Adrian Walker stood beneath the inscription, reviewing the repaired structural plans with Thomas Grant. The eastern anchor had been replaced, independent engineers had approved the correction, and construction was finally moving again. Ryan watched him for several seconds. Then he approached. Thomas stiffened, but Adrian raised one hand. It's all right. Ryan placed the box on the ground. I lost everything, he said. Adrian closed the plans. No. You lost your position. Ryan's jaw tightened. Isn't that enough? Adrian looked toward the workers above them. Enough. For whom? The question left Ryan without an immediate answer. He had expected rage. Perhaps even satisfaction. Instead, Adrian offered him something harder to face. Truth without cruelty. Ryan glanced at the red marks that had nearly disappeared from Adrian's wrists. I made a mistake. You made a decision, Adrian replied. Then you made it again when you ignored my credentials, again when you destroyed the plans, and again when you refused to hear the warning. Ryan looked away. Calling it a mistake had made the event sound accidental. But prejudice was rarely one moment. It was a pattern of choices repeated until someone finally refused to excuse them. I don't know how to fix this, Ryan admitted. Adrian's voice softened, but it did not lose its weight. You begin by remembering the people whose names never reached a hearing. Ryan looked toward the Hall of Dignity. For the first time, he seemed to understand that the building was not honoring Adrian because he had won. It was warning everyone who entered that power without humility could become another form of collapse. Ryan lifted the box and walked away. No crowd mocked him. No one placed him in handcuffs. Justice did not need humiliation to prove it had arrived. Adrian returned to the plans as sunlight moved across the repaired beam. Ryan had once stood at the gate deciding who belonged inside. Now the building would teach every officer the lesson he had learned too late: a badge may grant authority, but it can never grant superiority. 6 months later, the new Ashford Police Headquarters opened beneath a clear autumn sky, its glass walls reflecting hundreds gathered outside. Officers stood beside teachers, contractors, clergy, and families whose complaints had once quietly disappeared into locked drawers and deliberately softened reports. Above the entrance, bronze letters caught the morning light, "The Hall of Dignity," visible from every approach to the new building. Adrian Walker stood in front, wearing the same silver watch Ryan had examined with suspicion at the gate 6 months earlier. The marks on his wrists were gone, yet the lesson they carried remained sharper than anything preserved in photographs or testimony. Mayor Rebecca Hayes approached the microphone, but instead of beginning with celebration, she asked the crowd to observe complete silence together. For 1 minute, no machinery moved, no cameras clicked, and no officer shifted beneath the weight of the names displayed nearby. They belonged to citizens whose complaints had been reopened after Ryan Cole's record exposed a much wider pattern of institutional neglect. Some had received apologies, some had received settlements, and several officers now faced discipline for protecting conduct they knew was wrong. Justice had not arrived as one dramatic punishment, it had arrived as files reopened, voices restored, and silence finally made costly. Rebecca invited Adrian forward, and the crowd rose before he reached the podium, applause rolling through the plaza like thunder itself. He waited until the sound faded, then looked toward the officers standing beneath the building he had drawn from nothing alone. This headquarters was designed to withstand storms, fire, impact, and time, but no structure survives when its foundation rejects truth completely. He paused, letting every face absorb the difference between a building that appeared strong and an institution worthy of trust inside. Then he thanked Noah for recording, Thomas for testifying, and every citizen who had returned despite once being ignored by authorities. He did not mention Ryan's name until the final sentence, and when he did, his voice carried neither triumph nor hatred. What happened here began with one man, but it survived because too many others believed looking away kept them innocent forever. The crowd remained still as Adrian turned toward the bronze words above the doors and lifted his eyes into the sunlight. "A badge can open this entrance," he said, "but only dignity can make the people beyond it feel protected and respected." Then the doors opened, and the city entered a headquarters designed not merely to command authority, but to answer for it. Long after the cameras disappeared, people still paused beneath the bronze letters at the entrance. The Hall of Dignity. Some entered wearing uniforms. Others carried memories of moments when uniforms had made them afraid. Yet every person passed beneath the same words, and that was exactly what Adrian Walker had intended. He never described what happened to him as victory. Victory suggested that one man had defeated another. This had been something deeper. A city had been forced to look at the distance between the justice it promised and the behavior it had allowed. Complaints once buried were now reviewed by independent investigators. Officers received intervention training led by community advocates. Every supervisor was required to document why a citizen's statement had been dismissed. The changes were not perfect. No policy could erase humiliation already endured. No public apology could return the years people spent believing their voices did not matter. But silence was no longer automatic, and authority was no longer accepted without questions. Thomas Grant remained at the construction company, though he began every new project by telling workers about the morning fear made him silent. Noah Bennett received a Civic Courage Award, but he kept the phone that recorded the incident as a reminder that evidence matters only when someone is willing to reveal it. Ryan Cole disappeared from public view. Some said he moved away. Others said he entered counseling and began writing apologies to the citizens whose complaints had been reopened. Adrian never asked whether the rumors were true. Redemption could not be demanded. It had to be chosen. One evening, Adrian returned to the headquarters after everyone had gone home. Golden light stretched across the lobby floor, touching the steel eagle above the entrance and the framed original blueprint mounted beneath it. In one corner of the frame, a faint tear remained visible. Adrian had asked the museum team not to hide it. The damage belonged there. It showed that dignity was not the absence of scars. It was the refusal to let those scars define the final design. He stood alone beneath the building he had created and remembered Ryan's voice at the gate. "You don't belong here." Adrian looked around at the halls, offices, and training rooms shaped by his own hands. Then he smiled, not because Ryan had fallen, but because truth had remained standing. A badge had once tried to decide who belonged. But justice answered with something stronger: no one should need power, status, or a famous name to be treated like a human being.